Hello and welcome to Rushing the Field, a weekly national college football show from NBC Sports. He's Joshua Perry. I'm Nicole Auerbach. And Joshua, first I have to start. Do you have a real live tiger with you this week, or is it the fake live tiger? And then you're going to blame that tiger for the reason that the LSU Tigers lost. Just need to clarify this.
Okay, so I want to say I feel like I want to stand with Omar, right?
Omar Bradley.
Omar felt like somebody who could be a cousin of mine. Okay, but all of the hoopla and then all of the blaming and the finger pointing that happened after it, I don't know if I can insert myself into the Omar situation.
Yes, we did have, was it the governor or the lieutenant governor? Somebody saying that tiger actually performed better than the LSU Tigers, which I don't think is a popular thing to say in the state of Louisiana.
Well, here's the other thing. They got bigger fish to fry down there than worrying about a tiger, if we're going to be completely honest about the state of affairs.
This is true. However, it did not help LSU. They got crushed by Alabama, which was one of the very interesting results that affected the new college football playoff rankings. We got the second set of in-season CFP rankings on Tuesday night. We are going to give you a full episode, but we are going to spend some time first with the CFP reaction. And honestly, let's pull it up because we're going to start and show you, for those who are watching on YouTube, how the rankings look this week. There's a lot that's similar, of course. Oregon, Ohio State still 1-2. Texas slides up to 3 now that Georgia lost. So let's start with, I think there's 3 most interesting factors or parts of the CFP rankings this week. One is that Indiana and BYU have leapfrogged Tennessee.
Yes.
And neither of them had all that convincing wins, but they did win. Yes. This feels like a course correction. We'll get back to that in 1 second. Mm-hmm. Miami, after their first loss, falls to number 9.
Yep.
Still safely in the bracket as an at-large team. Georgia, though, after their second loss to Ole Miss, they fall down to number 12 in the rankings, but because there has to be a spot for the 5th conference champion, which would be Boise State, the highest ranked group of 5 champion, who's at number 13, they would bump Georgia out of the bracket. So Georgia would be the first team out. Let's start there.
A world where Georgia's getting bumped by Boise State, and this is not shade to Boise State. You guys have heard us talk about them and how much we love them, but just imagine if I would have told you at the beginning of the year that the reason Georgia did not get into the tournament was because they were the team that got bumped by the group of 5 champion. It's absolutely wild. I do think this is going to be a conversation that is had at the end of the year in the offseason, whenever it comes, between people in the Big Ten and people in the SEC, if this happens to be the case, that one of the most recognizable brands, a team that has been toward the top of college football over the last handful of years, is one of the teams that ends up getting bumped, left out for the group of 5 champion. Neither here nor there, but it is interesting. And again, the thing that we have talked about, there are a lot of ways that the seeding can happen. And this is one of the things where the group of 5 champ might have to leapfrog somebody in order to get in because they're not already ranked in the top 12. Or the idea, again, that gap between Miami, who would be the last Power 4 champ to get a bye, versus where the group of 5 champion is and how all of that works out. These are all things to take into consideration each week when these rankings come out.
Yeah, sorry. And that's a good correction because I said Miami would be as an at-large. No, they would actually be in still as the ACC champion, even though they're down to the number 9 ranking. This is where it gets really, really confusing. And I think is going to remain confusing for fans moving forward, because even looking at this bracket, you see a 4 and a 9 next to Miami. The 4 is the seed, 9 is the ranking. That's just confusing. So I think on the Georgia side, what I think is good about the way that the CFP selection committee is viewing this is that they are looking at head-to-head, right? Georgia is behind the teams that it's lost to. Ole Miss, last team in as an at-large, is right ahead of them. They just beat them by 18 points. That makes a lot of sense. Alabama safely in. This is a team that I think basically has punched its ticket to the CFP with that win over LSU that a lot of people are viewing as an eliminator game. So I love this. This is the projected first round matchup for them. Alabama, number 10 at Indiana. Bloomington hosting a first round game. And that's particularly funny because you have so many former Indiana coaches on the Alabama staff. So I love that. But I do think it is consistent with some of the overall rules and policies related to the CFP selection committee that head-to-head is important here. We're seeing some of that as we look through these 2-loss teams in the SEC. I agree to your point. If this is something that looks like it does on Selection Sunday, Greg Sankey goes nuclear.
Yes.
Absolutely goes nuclear. Georgia gets
100%.
left out, and a Boise State team that is not even ranked in the top 12 gets in instead of them.
Yeah, and it's one of the issues that I've always had with this format. I personally don't like the auto bids to begin with, and I don't like giving the first round buys to only conference champs. Because again, like you're looking at the Big Ten, for example, like you have to bypass Ohio State and Penn State right now because they happen to be in the one conference that's really top heavy. And so they can't get what I think they would have earned through their body of work, which is unfortunate. I get having the buy-in and everything else. It is interesting. You said all of the Indiana coaches that are now on Alabama's staff. Let's not forget Kurt Cignetti spent some time under Nick Saban at Alabama, that game in the North. And could you imagine a world if Indiana had that matchup and they won at home against Alabama? It would feel like we're not even in a college football universe we recognize.
No, we're not. And if you could hear this background noise, that is my dog, Red Auerbach, barking. And I will eventually
the coach?
take a break and I'll go get it. But no, he is the coach.
Okay.
You can call him the coach. The coach is chiming in here about that matchup. That would be pretty incredible and probably the answer to like a trivia question someday of the first year of the 12-team college football playoff. Okay, so let's get your thoughts on Miami falling down to number 9 after their first loss of the season. They really don't have a signature win. They don't have something to prop up this resume, but it feels like the selection committee is giving them enough of a benefit of the doubt here by not dropping them further to say, hey, even if you lose the ACC championship game, you've got a chance as an at-large team. Like, this is the whole question, right, Joshua? We've been wondering this for weeks. Are the ACC and the Big 12 going to be one-bid leagues? I feel like keeping Miami at 9, it leaves the door open that they could be an at-large team.
Well, and the committee's already done this thing where it's like, we're not going to punish a team that has to play the extra game, which I understand it, but I don't necessarily love it either. And for Miami, it's like, I asked myself the question, if some of these teams were playing in a different conference, would their record look the way that it does? I really do think there is this distinction between record and resume that we have to keep in mind. And for all the consternation about BYU being where they were a week ago, like Miami is actually what people thought BYU was a week ago, a team that kept winning in ways that you felt like weren't sustainable, except for the fact that they couldn't say that we have top 25 wins this place, and this place. So I am very curious to see how that all works out between the Big 12 and the ACC. But here we are. If they do keep their word that they're not going to punish teams for playing the extra game, they're going to paint themselves into a corner.
Joshua, it's funny you said that Miami is actually what BYU was, or the way that the committee treated BYU a week ago. Talked about some of these fortunate endings and some of the ways that these teams have won games. I mean, we've all seen the probability charts for these BYU games, especially the one against Utah last week. It was very slim. I mean, literally, Utah thought they won the game before the holding penalty was called.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see BYU move up as well as Indiana move up. They jumped Tennessee. And it's interesting because these are teams that I was real heated about last week. I was very upset that BYU has been disrespected because they had top 25 wins. They were behind teams like a Texas, Penn State. These are teams that don't have those signature wins. And instead, like, they're coming off of a really shaky win. Indiana also is tested for the first time all season long against Michigan, a not very good Michigan team. They move up. This, to me, was the selection committee saying, hey, we messed up last week. We had them too low. We're going to course correct this, not based on exactly what they did this weekend, but really like their full body work and where they should have been already. I saw that Ward Manuel was asked about this, about why they moved up and Tennessee didn't. And he said that they had big wins. So the teams that they played were Michigan and Utah. Both of those teams are not very good this season. Like typically, yes, typically those would be big games. My buddy Chris Vanini over at The Athletic would say these are helmet wins, right? It sounds bigger than it was because of the context of where those teams are this year. Feels like either the committee was a little bit blinded by that or they were just course correcting. Because otherwise, like there's no reason that you think, more of BYU this week after watching them eke out that win over Utah than you did a week ago. I just think that they realized, nope, they shouldn't have been 9 a week ago. Nope, Indiana was too low a week ago. We got to fix that.
Yeah, here's the thing. I think it's a combination of both. I do think it's a course correction. I also think that, it sounds good, as you said, when you beat Michigan, when you beat Utah. And for the BYU situation, I thought that it was fairly easy to justify BYU's ranking a week ago because of game control. You mentioned the probability chart from the Utah game. It was the same damn probability chart when they played Oklahoma State. They had a 99.8% chance of losing that game, according to the analytics. And if it wasn't for the epidemic of college football, bad tackling, they would have lost that football game. So I do think there are ways you can justify it. Again, I go back to this idea of if they were playing in the Big Ten or they were playing in the SEC, they would have had a loss by now. 100%. I believe that. So again, they could have justified it, but to your point, I think they heard the blowback and they heard the justifications, rightfully so, of why BYU and Indiana were probably too low. And they decided this was the week that they were just going to mess with the rankings, even though Tennessee did nothing to really deserve to drop below those two teams, or I guess not move.
Yeah. And again, that's totally fair. We've seen the committee do this. Like they have to do these weekly rankings. Not much is actually changing. They claim that they start from scratch every single week. So it's also just possible that enough people felt differently about those teams that they just voted them in a different order and they were in a different
weird
pool.
Week to feel differently about these teams.
I agree.
It's such a weird week for that.
It is, but like it's getting harder to compare some of these teams that are not in the SEC to the teams that are in the SEC because the SEC teams are all beating each other up. So we have all these crazy tiebreaker scenarios and like I guess you got to keep Tennessee above Alabama, then Alabama has to stay above Georgia. But are you directly comparing these teams? Like, how did the tiebreakers work? Whereas, we've looked at these resumes for the Penn States and the Indianas, right? Like they're not playing the same schedules. They're not playing enough of each other. And that's kind of why the Big Ten has so many teams in the top 5. You have 4 Big Ten teams in the top 5, and not all of them are going to play each other. Penn State's not playing Oregon, right? Like you're not getting those data points. Whereas the teams that are relevant right now in the SEC that are all kind of bunched up in that 1-2 loss area, a lot of them have played each other, especially the 2-loss teams. But honestly, put Texas in the category with Oregon, with Penn State, with Indiana. Texas hasn't played a lot of those teams either. So you're looking at teams that, maybe they don't have like those big wins, but they don't have the losses because they're not playing the same schedule that Georgia's playing.
I'm with you there. And what makes this more challenging, not to be an apologist for the committee, but like every single one of these teams that we're trying to rank is flawed. Like I would even look at Oregon and the scoreboard looked right at the end of the game against Maryland. I thought Maryland challenged them in some ways last week. Their wide receivers looked really good. I thought Oregon's offense probably looked as simple as it's looked all year. And part of that is because Maryland's defensive front has generally been stout this year. Like every team you can look at and you can say like, there's something with these teams. And so when you start having to make the cross comparisons between, different resumes, different conferences, what does this look like? What does that look like? What is the data that we have? I understand where the challenge comes.
Let's flip back just before we get off the subject to the full rankings, because I think we were talking about this from the ACC perspective, but I want to just make this point pretty clear on the Big 12 perspective, because Colorado had a huge win. Colorado, clear path to the Big 12 championship game. they're still only ranked 17th. Kansas State is ranked 16th. Those are the next best teams in the Big 12 behind BYU, who is now at 6. That does not set you up that well for getting a second team into the playoff. Like, if you get an upset in the conference championship, like, we still don't know. Could BYU hang on? We don't know.
Yeah.
And certainly, like, making the conference championship game, I don't think would be enough for those teams. So, like, you're looking at these very real scenarios that we talked about back in the preseason of the Big Ten and the SEC dominating this 12-team bracket. Plus, obviously, Notre Dame is safely in right now. They're not quite in hosting range, but they could certainly get there by the end of the year. So it is kind of that worst nightmare of everybody who was worried that the SEC and the Big Ten were really going to kind of take over the sport even more than they already have.
Let me ask you this question. And again, with kind of the backdrop of they claim they don't want to punish teams for playing in the conference championship. If BYU would lose a close game to Colorado in the Big 12 championship, do both of them not get in?
That's a great question. So is BYU undefeated to that point in your scenario?
They're undefeated to that point.
Ooh,
certainly it feels like they would move up over whoever loses Ohio State, Indiana. They would have an opportunity to leapfrog whichever team that is.
Mm-hmm.
And Colorado comes in, they continue to get wins. They would be at least above Kansas State in that scenario, in my mind. I mean,
but they could still be outside the top 12, right? So in that scenario, maybe Colorado's like a bid thief too. So you're bumping somebody else out. No, that's actually really fascinating.
I'm with you, but like, would they be outside of the top 12 still if they get a win over the number 5 or 6 team in the country?
I don't know.
And they would be a 2-loss team with a win over number 5 or 6.
No, it's a really good scenario, and especially because, again, with so many teams like Ohio State is the number 2 team in the country to this committee, but they cannot be higher than a 5 seed right now, right?
Right.
So like, you're going to have a bunch of teams in that 5 to 8 range that don't play in a conference championship game. Just sit there. And then we are going to really see if people get hurt for playing and losing that game. I would say last year that Oregon did.
Yeah.
They lost to the same team for the second time last season in the additional game. Both were very close. But the order of the rest of the rankings tells me that the committee penalized Oregon for a second loss. And I think we are moving away from this idea of like, okay, all the unbeatens go, then all the 1-loss teams, then all the 2-loss teams. But you can't tell me it's not going to affect the teams to see an extra loss at the end of that record.
That's what I'm getting at. I think it does. Like, I ultimately think they do get penalized, regardless of what they're telling us right now. Like, the nature of the way that this thing goes is that's new information. We learned something more about that team and their ability or inability to win a football game, and I think they're going to consider it.
Honestly, peeling back the curtain, when I went through the mock, you pull up each team's resume and there is color coding, right? So it's like bright green if it's like a really great win. And then, like, based on, again, strength of schedule, like sort of strength of record, like all these different metrics of like how the committee views these teams, like a bright red loss would be like to Kent State, somebody that's ranked really low in the FBS. But like the losses are clearly marked as red. There's like little wins and losses next to things. There's color coding on the quality of them. But even if you lose to a really good team twice, that's, you see the color, like the brightness of the color is still there multiple times. Like, you see those results. And there is, again, part of it's like to make it simplified, right? Like you're looking at a bunch of different data sheets and team sheets, but it tells you a story, right? So it becomes very hard to ignore the fact that there is an additional loss on that team sheet compared to somebody else's. And so that's what's going to be really interesting. And I think too, if you see these conference championship games cutting teams out or knocking teams out, you're going to be incentivized not to want to play in them. Like 100%. Are you going to sit guys? Are you going to try to avoid qualifying for that? Which then, again, I think if you're Tony Petitti or Greg Sankey, you're furious about that. You have kept conference championship games in this format. The SEC champ game is so important to that conference. You don't want a scenario where you're incentivized not to want to play in that game. So I think that's something, this is a really good point by you, of something to watch down the stretch.
Yep.
Truly, what are they incentivizing by the way that they're ranking these teams?
It is so interesting. And like, what's funny to me, I was a player in 2014, the first year of the 14 playoff.
Brand new.
Obviously brand new. I was in the thick of it. And none of this stuff was in my mind because like, it was just like, win the games, and you make the tournament. And now there's like all these different things when it comes to seeding and conference championships. And could you get a bid thief and like who's on the bubble and all these like wild things to consider. And this is brand new. And we just sit up here and speculate. And I can't wait to see how it all unfolds. I want the chaos. I want the upsets in the conference championship weekend because I want to see who's telling us the truth or who's a liar.
I think that's a great point. I love that you're calling it the tournament too, because a lot of this terminology is what we use for March Madness and the NCAA tournament. So like
this is what
with
it is.
The bigger bracket, it is more like that. So yeah, these are all things that we are tracking on. Can't wait to see. Honestly, Joshua, your year, that data point, the 13th data point of beating Wisconsin, that became a huge part. The Big 12 added a championship game because of that whole narrative around that. So there's definitely going to be fallout from whatever happens here down the stretch. We'll have those live reaction pods on this feed the rest of the way, and obviously a ton of coverage around Selection Sunday as well. But let's get into the ticket stub, your point of entry to the pod on the news front. There was a lot of news across the sport this week, but we have to start with something that happened really, really late Saturday night. You and I were both up because we were texting about this BYU-Utah game.
Because we're sickos.
How it ended. We're sickos. Yes, of course. But what happened at the end of the game, Utah's athletic director is seen screaming at an official on the sideline as like the post game is unfolding. There was that holding penalty that had it not been called or had there not been a hold, game would have been over. Okay. So Mark Harlan then goes into the press conferences and goes on a pretty epic rant. So let's hear it. This is Mark Harlan, Utah's athletic director.
12 years. This game was absolutely stolen from us. We were excited about being in the Big 12, but tonight I am not. We won this game. Someone else stole it from us. Very disappointed. I will talk to the commissioner. This was not fair to our team. I'm disgusted by the professionalism of the officiating crew tonight.
Okay, so the first thing that jumps out to me about this comment is not just they stole it from us, which we've actually heard a lot. Like this is becoming a little bit of a trend. I mean, the first thing I thought of was like the game 5 of the WNBA finals. You had like Nafisa Collier being like, nope, they stole the game from us. Like there was an official, a call, a foul that changed the outcome of the game. So that's happening. The part of like, I was happy to be in the Big 12, but today I am not. That is like a dagger. Dagger into Brett Yormark because Utah did not want to go to the Big 12. Like they were diehard Pac-12 all the way through until they had to go when the league was disintegrating. So I was not surprised that the conference then acted very, very quickly to penalize Mark Harlan. So he was hit with a $40,000 fine and a public reprimand for criticizing both the officials and the conference. And like the reprimand was like, you are not professional. Like this was just an unacceptable thing to say. There was also, as part of this, just for context, they didn't put this in the release, but like a $40,000 fine is significantly higher than what they typically would do. Other athletic directors had been fined for criticizing officiating or just, different disparaging comments in like the $25,000 range. So they're trying to make a point here. And I think you had to, because like you can't have people saying like, I actually don't want to be in this conference.
Does the fine money come out of their revenue check? Is that how or do they have to come up out their pocket right now? With that?
I would think pocket, right? Like it's like you're finding a specific person.
Pocket. Yeah, that's what I hope it is. But neither here nor there. It is a very interesting thing to see that type of outburst publicly. And I'm glad you brought up the finger wagging on the field,
I think that's part of it. Yeah.
Well, it's a huge deal. Like, that was a spectacle, and we all saw that live on national television. And then it played over and over again on social media. And I am the first one to criticize officiating. And especially this year, we have seen some really poor officiating across the board in college football. I think that on the scale of bad calls, this is like extremely low. I think they could have made that call at any point in the game. I think it was a foul. Like if the official would have decided to keep the flag in their pocket, I wouldn't have felt a way about it. But the idea that they threw it, I don't think is anything nefarious or crazy or like stealing a game from somebody. And so I don't think it helps officials and where they're at right now. Then you get to this idea of calling out the conference, like, brother, do not do that. Like, we don't bite the hand that feeds us. This is something that we should have learned when we were really young. Like, that is a crazy thing to do. And I don't want to like soapbox this thing, but I think people have to get over this. They stole whatever from us that we've been doing in society. Let's just not do that. I think it's kind of tacky. It's a little bit weird. And here we are, like $40,000. You got to eat that now.
Okay, and so last point on this, Mark Harlan did apologize. He put out a statement that said that he recognized that there are more appropriate times and avenues to express the concerns that he expressed at that press conference, and that he made those comments after having just left our team locker room where our student athletes were hurting and upset. Proud to be a member of the Big 12 Conference. Look forward to working with our peers and continue to enhance the league. So very, proud to be a member of the Big 12 Conference. Everyone's making nice and trying to move forward. But we will see what comes next, if anything.
Can I get one last point on this?
Absolutely. You love petty things. So the floor is yours.
Sitting down, making one statement, and then getting up is crazy work. Like, you're not going to answer any questions. Like, we're going to sit down, we're going to say our piece, and then we're going to exit stage left. That is wild.
I think Kyle Whittingham also only did like a 3-minute press conference after that game too. So people are in their feelings. We love it. We like to see that personality and these the emotion that we get in college football, but there are consequences, and this one was a $40,000 fine. One last piece of news this week that I would be very curious your thoughts on, JP, is that Dana Holgorsen was announced as Nebraska's offensive coordinator and play caller this week. Now, if you did not realize that Dana Holgorsen was on the Nebraska staff, that's totally fine because he was not there until last week. He was brought on as an offensive consultant. He was a consultant for most of the season at TCU. So he comes in a week ago. Matt Rhule is like, listen, we got some problems with our offense. It's not working. They're 96th nationally in yards per game, 99th in scoring. Got this really awesome 5-star quarterback in Dylan Raiola, but we need to fix it. We need to work. And we also need to get bowl eligible because we're stuck at 5 wins again. And in the span of a week, he decides, hey, we're going to go with the outsider. We're going to bring in someone who's known as a great offensive mind. And we're going to give the reins to Dana Holgorsen. We're going to demote Marcus Satterfield, who's still on the staff, by the way. I think he's just coaching tight ends now. But this is Dana Holgorsen's offense. And by the way, we hope he'll stick around next year and be our offensive coordinator. I don't know if I've seen something like this. This is pretty wild to do mid-November, a couple games left, to just be like, hey, you haven't been around us at all until last week, and this is all yours now.
So I saw that they had brought in Holgorsen last week, and the initial thought in my mind was like, damn, they got the OC replacement just like lurking around the building right now. And they didn't even wait until the offseason to make the move. If I was Marcus Satterfield, I would probably just put in my resignation at this point and keep it pushing. But I understand why you would hang around and finish the job that you were there to do and not leave your players like that. Do you remember a few weeks ago when Satterfield was at the podium during the press conference and somebody asked him, like, how many yards each play would you like to see for your offense? And he said somewhere between 4 and 6 yards, and people were cooking him because they're like, that would rank toward the bottom of FBS in yards per play. And I felt bad for him in that moment because when you're a coordinator, your thought process isn't like, I'm going to get 20 yards on this play a majority of the time. There are times where certainly you draw up a shot, you're trying to get chunks, But like most of the time, 1st and 10 base plays, you're like, how can I get 4 yards so I can be on schedule? How can I get 6 yards so I can be in a manageable 2nd or 3rd down? Right. And so I felt bad for him. But then I watched the Ohio State game, and they ran probably like 7, 8, 9 screens. And they probably had negative 15 yards on the 9 screens that they ran. Their last drive, they started, I think, with 2 screens on that drive after it didn't work the whole game. And they put themselves in a bad situation where they were behind the sticks and Dylan Raiola throws an interception to end it. And that was the moment in my head where I'm like, this is not working the way that they need it to work. So I understand exactly how they got here. I feel bad that they're in this spot. But now it feels like, I mean, we're trying to break the bolus streak. Like, we're getting toward the end of the year. We lost to UCLA, who people did not view as a very good football team, although they've won 3 in a row now. Like, they're kind of in that crunch time spot to be able to take that leap year 2 for what people thought Nebraska was going to be.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely why they're doing it now. I think, you're not going to see like a true Dana Holgorsen offense, right? Like he's joining this program in week 12. Matt Rule said that, right? Like we know Dana from like the air raid, Mike Leach disciples, that type of offense. But they're not going to change that. They're going to be a pro style offensive system. Matt Rule said he's just hoping they'll simplify their approach, focus on the strengths of the players and what they've got. Because again, like we saw this early in the season, like there is talent there. This can be a complete football team that can win games, and they are stuck. They're trying to break an 8-year streak of not being bowl eligible. They're trying to do that by bringing in Dana Holgorsen. Like I said, also trying to keep him for next year. This is going to be a really fascinating coordinator cycle because, we might not be seeing head coaching changes because of some of the buyouts and rev share coming. So you're going to see people really need to make significant changes in the coordinator level. And so, this could also be Matt Rule being like, hey, we want to get a jump ahead of everybody else that's going to be looking for an OC.
I think that's smart. I really do. And to your point, like we should have a larger conversation in one of the later podcasts about this rev share that's coming and how it's affecting the way athletic departments are moving when it comes to hiring and firing. Because the head coach buyouts are crazy. But what we have learned is they are willing to spend a few $1 million if necessary to get rid of some coordinators. We watched what Florida State did. I think
was like $8 million.
$8 million.
Buyouts?
Yes.
Yeah.
With offsets, of course, so they could get some of that back. But $8 million as it stands. Florida Atlantic, who's not on a lot of people's radars, but they're like 2-7 right now. They made some staff changes. And I think the idea is let's be ahead of the curve when it comes to having to hire coordinators and staffers, because we know that it's going to get a little bit hectic as time goes on.
All right, let's jump into a segment that we have been just batting around for a few weeks. We've been, every time something crazy happens, like Colorado has a clear path to the college football playoff, which is a real sentence as we sit here in mid-November. They could win the Big 12, get the auto bid, and get a bye as well. Like that's the world that we're living in. Deion Sanders year 2. It reminds us of some of our overreactions, our hot takes, our misguided thoughts looking back now from like weeks 1 and week 2. So Joshua, I tried to list a bunch of them, the ones that I could remember. Would love to get your thoughts on things we were totally wrong on, because there's always going to be something, very small sample in the beginning of the season, of things that we think we learned that end up not being true. So let me read off a couple and then feel free to join in at any point. Oregon's got problems. The offense is a problem. It sucks. They only beat an FCS team in Idaho by 10 points. Well, they're the last team from the preseason AP top 25 to be unbeaten. It's literally like we're talking historical levels of parity. Everywhere else except Oregon keeps winning. After week 2, we thought Nebraska was like on a rocket ship up. Matt Rule had it all figured out. They're going to be bowling by Halloween. And Colorado's got problems, and it's going to nosedive just like it did in year 1. Could not be more wrong about that, as we just went through with both of those teams. We also said at one point that LSU's defense was so much better because they played USC well, which we thought USC was going to be a lot better too. So there was a lot early that was not ultimately true.
Well, LSU is taking us for a ride as well, by the
Sure.
way, and USC, they took us for a ride early on. I mean, there are some other ones like Nico is going to be a Heisman frontrunner, and then as it turns out, like the strength of Tennessee is actually their defense and not their offense this year, which feels really weird. We said Clemson was in hell, and it's not true that they are down that bad, but this might also be like the kind of the delineator in a generation 4-year span of football for Clemson where they're not going to make the college football playoff. So there's one that's really interesting. We had the Penn State takes. My goodness, Andy Kotelnicki and this offense, and these guys are totally different. Look at what they did to West Virginia. And as it turns out, like, yes, it's a good offense, but certainly not worlds different than what we had seen before. So one of my favorite things is the overreaction, and I like the theatrics. I'm a reality TV guy, but we gotta come correct when we do have the overreactions.
Yes, Real Housewives guy, actually, very specifically.
Yes, I am
of your reality TV watching.
Yes, I was watching Potomac the other day. It was great.
Okay, great. The only ones that I have ever watched is Salt Lake City, so I need to get
so
back
good.
into that, so then we can
Yes.
discuss.
Yes.
Part of the reason I got into that one was because you had one of the housewives married to a Utah coach. So I was like, oh.
and he got some FaceTime on the game late on Saturday. I texted Maddie and I was like, "Hey, Coach Shaw, he's making an appearance."
Did that get her to watch football or no?
Are you kidding me? Absolutely not.
That's what I thought. My last overreactions from the early weeks was after week 1, Notre Dame, clear path to the playoff. Biggest winners of week 1. What an easy schedule the rest of the way. To week 2, losing to Northern Illinois, going, they're out. Like, you and I didn't say that.
No, we didn't. Let's be clear
You and I
about that.
said,
yes.
Nope, if they went out, they're absolutely making the playoff.
Yes.
But there were so many people that were like, you shouldn't be allowed to lose to a MAC team and make the college football playoff. And here we are. They are squarely in the bracket. If the season ended today, I think they're going to end up hosting a game. They went out here. They're right on the cusp of that. So they were like the perfect overreaction team because we went so high and so low after weeks 1 and 2.
I'm proud of us for not joining in on they won't make it. And this is coming from a guy who lost a really bad game at home early in the season in the playoff era. Yeah. I know how these things go, but you've always said this, and I do think it's true, is that this format was designed for a one-loss Notre Dame team to make it every single year. Even without a conference championship, there is a path for Notre Dame to make it every single year.
Yep, doesn't matter who the loss is to.
Yep.
And we're seeing it.
All right, you want to get to a little WTF on RTF here.
Yeah, it's so good that I think we have 2 WTF moments this week.
Yeah, we got a bonus for you, which is going to be really enjoyable. But let's start with the football one here. Kirby Smart called Jake Pope an idiot for celebrating with Ole Miss after they took that L. I think we got a little video here, and then
so he's
Kirby.
He's like jumping up and down and cheering.
Which
I need to watch. Like,
I've never cheered after.
Yeah, I need to watch this again. Okay, so he's hugging somebody, he's jumping up and down, giant smile on his face. While
looked like there was a little dap up at the end too.
And Ole Miss, the fans are like re-rushing the field at this point. Okay, so this
we got two field storms, by the way.
Yes,
one before the game was over.
They got penalized like an extra $100,000 because the fans got on the field before the end of the game. Okay, so Kirby Smart calls him an idiot after this, right? Okay, and he apologizes too, by the way, and he's trying to explain that like he saw some family friends and some people that were there to watch him, but also support somebody on the Ole Miss sideline. But Kirby that was actually really harsh for Kirby Smart to say that he was an idiot.
I mean, of all the people to call idiots on that roster after the summer they had driving around Athens, I mean, this was crazy. I do think we have the sound of Kirby Smart as well, so let's roll that and take a listen.
Social media of Jake Pope seemingly celebrating with some Ole Miss fans on the field after the game. Just wanted to see if you had seen that and what your reaction to it was.
Yeah, what an idiot. I mean, just stupid. I didn't see it till today, but he's embarrassed about it. He's upset about it. That's obviously a childhood friend of his. He grew up and played with there at Buford and knows him, hadn't seen him in forever, but just not real smart. But to be honest with you, I don't have time to waste energy on that. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like my focus is on Tennessee. I'm not worried about that.
I'm not worried about that. I get it, like, you know, but I'm sure there was more conversation that happened there. Here's my biggest question, Nicole, is why doesn't he talk to or about Carson Beck like that? Because we watch Kirby every weekend get animated. Like, and I love coaches that get on guys. I played for a coach who was like that. But the one guy who it seems like he's just, you know, trying to manage a little bit differently is the
like hugs, like will hug and kind of like have his arms around him on the sideline.
Man,
goes out of his way not to criticize after he throws interceptions.
Yeah, it's a wild thing to watch, just that dynamic there of the player and the coach, and knowing who Kirby is and how animated he can be. It's just something else. But let's get to this bonus. And you brought this to my attention. I had not seen it floating around
so good.
The socials. But this ain't football. This is Wheel of Fortune. Y'all are going to want to watch this one.
I'd like to buy a U.
Well, you're going to get 3 U's.
I'd like to solve the puzzle.
Okay, well, let's hear it.
Treat yourself a round of sausage. No.
I'm sorry, that's not it. Over to Katina.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so first of all, it's not the same number of spots for letters, right? So treat would not fit.
Right.
Sausage
does not start with an A.
Does not start with an A. There's just
well, you're going to get 3 U's.
Oh gosh, I mean, this is
like it's an A, obvious applause, a round of applause. Give yourself a round of applause. I mean, but the idea that this is a phrase, which is supposed to be a common phrase,
yes,
that treat yourself a round of sausage is so common in your life that this is what you think Wheel of Fortune is trying to get you to say is my favorite part of the whole thing.
I will say there is nothing like a barbecue smoked sausage, you know, and so I understand as someone who has treated myself as an eater myself, how you can get there in your brain. But there are some things that happen inside our noggins that we don't let out. And this is one of those things.
I always think that this would be my best game. Like if I were on a game show, really? I'd be really good at Wheel of Fortune.
So Jeopardy would be mine. And we go to this spot called Tony's when we're in Connecticut. And Tony, the guy who the restaurant's named after, asks a lot of trivia. I'm not good at his trivia, but the Jeopardy trivia, I am phenomenal at.
Okay. I'm really good at Wheel of Fortune. Common phrases, that sort of thing.
Well, you're a writer. You should be great at Wheel of Fortune.
True. And I can quickly identify the correct number of letters in a word. And that sausage doesn't start with an A. So I think I would do better than our pal Will. All-time Wheel of Fortune moment. Just absolutely incredible. If we could give him a trophy, if we could give him an award, we would. But there is one that is, to get back to football, that is going to be handed out here in not too long from now. Okay. The Heisman Trophy. We are getting closer and closer to handing out the greatest individual award in the sport. An all-time trophy, really. I mean, it's one of the coolest ones. We've already seen guys like Travis Hunter do the Heisman pose after big plays this season. So this is what we're going to do for Power Rankings this week, presented by Citi. We're going to talk about those Heisman Trophy candidates. I'm going to give you my list right now, which is not actually how BetMGM has it. I still have Ashton Jeanty in the number 1 spot.
Okay.
He is absolutely the best running back in the country. I think he is one of those guys that if you are drafting in the NFL draft and you're like, oh, running backs, you get them later on. No, you're not going to get a guy like Ashton Jeanty. Like, do the Bijan Robinson, whatever calculation you were on him. He's got to be a first-round guy. That's where you should be on Ashton Jeanty. His numbers are not quite as robust as they were earlier in the season. He did go over 200 yards this past week. He is playing in the Mountain West, a little bit out of sight, out of mind. You could point out the level of competition, not exactly the same as some of the other guys on my power rankings, but he's getting dinged or getting a little bit forgotten through no fault of his own. They're just a little bit out of the spotlight. He's still absolutely critical to what Boise State does for them to keep winning. Their only loss on the season, 3-point loss to the number 1 team in the country. He absolutely better get to New York, but I think he should still be considered the favorite to win it all. But BetMGM this week has decided that Travis Hunter, the two-way star from Colorado, should be the actual favorite. And honestly, a lot of people straw polls and a lot of lists this week. Everyone's kind of coalesced around that this week as well. Travis Hunter is like right outside the top 10 or around the top 10 in all the receiving categories, touchdowns, yards, all of that. Plus, we know how many snaps he plays on the defensive side of the ball. Totally unique player than we've seen in college football in a really, really long time. So rightfully so, he should be right up there. I just have him in my number 2 spot right now. Dylan Gabriel, quarterback of the undefeated Oregon Ducks, at number 3. He was my preseason favorite to win the Heisman. And listen, like, Oregon's good. They're just very sound. They're very consistent across the board. We talked so much about how much chaos there's been and top 5 upsets over and over again. They haven't really been involved in anything like that, or it's not really even gotten dicey since they played Ohio State. So he's just quietly getting it done for Oregon. Really good offense, really good team. I've got him in my number 3 spot. Cam Ward, number 4. These are the 4 guys that have been in the mix the entire season long.
Mm-hmm.
Like Dylan Gabriel, maybe not as much in the early part of the season, but since they played and beat Ohio State, he's been there. These 4 dudes are going to be in New York City, I think. And it's just a matter of whatever order it's going to be between these 4. There's just not really been clear separation yet. Cam Ward is a magician, right? We've seen him do crazy things on the football field. Honestly, like, we knew the magic was going to run out at some point, and it did, and they lost a game to Georgia Tech, but he is the reason that they are as good as they are, that they're winning as much as they are, and he's pulled a rabbit out of his hat to win various games over the course of this season. These are 4 guys that I, again, would buy the plane ticket for right now to send them to New York City for the Heisman ceremony. Number 5, our guy Curtis Rourke.
Yep.
Indiana. Listen, they are up to number 5 in the country in the latest college football playoff rankings. Like, this is unbelievable. They're in line to host a game for the college football playoff. I think they can play Ohio State and lose to Ohio State as long as it's a competitive game and make the playoff. Like, that's the kind of wiggle room I think Indiana has. Curtis Rourke has been really, really good, really consistent, really efficient. They've been really good on both sides of the ball, but Curtis Rourke, to me, like, feels like he's going to be like a lifelong NFL backup quarterback, make a ton of money, be really reliable when he needs to come to games. But he's just having a really special season too. So I would love to see him get to New York. I've seen him popping up on these lists. He's been on mine before as well at NBCSports.com. But I just think it's like a clear drop off from 4 to 5 because those 4 guys, Ashton Jeanty, Travis Hunter, Dylan Gabriel, Cam Ward, are the guys that are defining this season. Like, these are the players, the individuals that are must-see TV.
I'm there with you. And to continue on Curtis Rourke, like, I think you and I on Saturdays are real tuned in to Big Ten football, obviously for what we cover in prime time. But like in the story of college football this year, Indiana has been in the forefront. And a big reason why is because of what Rourke has done. And even last week against Michigan, where his stats do not look like they looked in the other games, like, there were some drops out there. It's not all his fault. Like, he was doing everything that he could. And so I love the fact that people nationally are starting to pay attention to the way that he's played. If I had any changes, I would flip 1 and 2. I'm big Travis Hunter. I was pretty early on the season. I know he got banged up and kind of Colorado fell into the shadows a little bit. But like, it's hard for me to say that anybody can be in the same league as him when he's playing over 100 reps a game. Right? Like, that's the impact. It's not just. But
here's the thing.
Go ahead.
His most impressive stat, and the first thing everyone leads with, is the number of snaps.
Yes.
Is that enough? Like, I mean, it
is for me.
Okay, that's what I'm wondering.
I
like,
mean,
I think obviously he's doing so much. It's unprecedented. But like everyone else, we start with like where they're throwing the ball, like the touchdowns, the yardage. For him, it's the amount of time he's on the field. I don't know. Right. Is that equivalent?
Well, I'll say this. He's got to split the pill offensively because that's one of the best wide receiver rooms in the country, right? Like, he's not a guy who's just going to get every single target because they've got 4 dudes in that wide receiver room that all deserve targets. And then he goes out there and he plays defense, and he would be, if he was just a corner, he would be the number 1 corner on my board, higher than Will Johnson or anybody else anybody would try to pitch to me. And having been somebody who we played Indiana in 2015, and that was a game where I played 108 reps and I thought I was going to die. He does that on a week-to-week basis. That's
like
really tough work. Go out there and perform that way. So, like, I know that's not a stat that people typically look at, but I do think it is something that it's hard. It's really hard for me to overlook the impact that he can have on both sides of the ball.
Oh, I think that's fair. Again, I like, this is my personal list and my personal power ranking.
It's hard to argue because Genty, to your point, like, we haven't seen something like it in a little while.
No, and that's where it's like, again, I just don't think anyone's clearly separated. Travis might, though. Like, he's going to have this run to a Big 12 championship game. Colorado, nobody had them in the college football playoff in year 2 for Deion Sanders after a 4-win season. So he's going to have a lot of spotlight games down the stretch. And then obviously you're looking at a couple teams, like, we're all going to watch Curtis Rourke against Ohio State. You're talking about Big 10 ACC championship game participants. Like, the moments and the spotlight will be there down the stretch.
No, there certainly will be some moments. I can't wait to watch this one. People have said it's unexciting. I disagree with it. I like the idea that they're, kind of, it's coming down to the wire and you really have to focus in on what's going on. People who have votes, which, Nicole, I know you do, and you do a great job of watching all of the games. Watch the damn games, please, so we can really decide who the most outstanding player in college football is. All right, let's get to some Week 12 previews and picks against the spread. We'll start with this one down the SEC. You got number 7 Tennessee. They're taking on what's Georgia this week? Tennessee is they're number 7.
No,
so
those
Georgia is number 12. Georgia, and Georgia is a 9-point favorite as of right now. Over under on that one is 48.5. Georgia, as we discuss, nasty loss, 18 points to Ole Miss. Carson Beck was bad again, but it wasn't 3 interceptions bad. It was, we don't trust him to actually throw the football down the field bad. Like, their whole game plan was quick, behind the line of scrimmage, anything to not put Carson Beck in a situation where he could throw a pick. That's bad to me. Georgia defensively, I said earlier this year, when they're playing great defense, it's championship level. The bad part about it is they don't play great defense every week, and it's just not the same as it used to be. They gave up a ton of yards to Ole Miss. Then you get Tennessee, and it was a little bit of a weird thing for me with the whole Nico situation. And Josh Heupel was like, oh, he's fine. If we would have needed him, we could have used him. But now I think I read that he's in concussion protocol. And so there's a little bit of a question there about Nico. So where are you leaning on this football game?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Georgia is going to win the game. I did a projection of my college football playoff bracket for the end of the season. And now that we only have a few more weeks of the regular season, I'm projecting individual results, right? So I projected Georgia to win this game and stay alive. Ultimately, I have them making my bracket, and I have Tennessee not making the bracket, which, again, as we just saw, if you put in this week's rankings, that's not how it looks. Tennessee is well positioned. They win this game. It's possible that we don't have to pull out the calculators and do all the crazy math for the SEC tiebreakers.
So bad.
Yes, but honestly, if there's a lot of 2-loss teams, it's going to be really, really messy in the SEC. Tennessee could simplify that because if Tennessee wins out, and then it's basically, if Texas and A&M win out, then it's just the winner of that game plays Tennessee. And it's that simple. I don't think Tennessee is good enough to do that, though, and to win out. They've been really inconsistent on the offensive side of the ball. The defense has been really, really good. But again, a lot of questions about Nico. And then, they said, he could have come back in the game last week. It got a little close and he didn't. So a lot of questions about that. But even he's had his freshman moments. I know he's a redshirt freshman, sophomore. What is he? Whatever it is. But he had moments that were very much inexperienced early in the game or early in the season. I just have some questions about that, but I do have a lot of questions about Georgia. We've talked a lot about Carson Beck. Completely with you. You could feel it as you're watching the game that they did not trust him to throw the deep ball or really intermediate game. And then, they couldn't call the game the way that they wanted to call it against Ole Miss because they don't trust him. And they're deciding to ride that out instead of play a different quarterback, which I think is very interesting for the Dogs. The defense did get gashed. I mean, almost 400 yards of offense to Ole Miss. That is an offense that we've said is incredibly potent. Other teams had figured it out, though. Other teams were more effective against it. So I'm definitely concerned, but I still have to believe that Kirby Smart, this team, this staff can get their guys up. I actually think being on the outside looking in for the playoff bracket, that's terrible timing if you're Tennessee to see that they just added a little more fuel to fire. This is Kirby Smart, who convinced his team coming off a national championship that somebody said they were going to go 7-5.
Who said that?
This is a master.
Who said that?
Psychological. Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea where he made that up. I don't know how
that was a Housewives quote, by the way.
Oh, I'm sorry. I need to get, I don't watch the Housewives.
I know
there.
You don't.
I'll be able to get the inside jokes. But my point is that of all weeks to have this happen where you're oh, Georgia's on the outside looking in, that's a rough time to draw them and actually have to play them. So I think the Bulldogs win. I don't think they cover, but I think
okay. Bingo. I'm there with you. I think it's going to be a tight game. And you're right about Kirby and the dark arts and his ability to motivate his team. That's what he does. Okay. He's a dark artist. But I guess the biggest issue that I have is I really don't care about his ability to motivate the team. Can you get the damn quarterback to play well? Can you get your running backs and your offensive line to run the football with consistency? They don't do very much well offensively.
They don't do anything. They don't do anything consistently.
No, they don't
at all.
And I feel the same way about Tennessee. I don't think there'll be a lot of points in this football game. I think there are two very good defenses. I think there are two offenses that leave a lot to be desired. Again, the question about Nico there for Tennessee, I think it's going to be a tight one. But if we're making picks right now, I do think Georgia's going to win this football game.
Same.
All right, let's move on to this next one. So we got Kansas at number 6, BYU. BYU, a 3-point favorite. I think this one opened somewhere in the range of 8 points. And now it's at 3 over under 55.5. Yes. And so part of it is because of this Kansas thing where they had the win last week that nobody anticipated. And I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think if they win out, they can make a bowl game. And it would be the third consecutive bowl game they would make, the first time in school history if they did that. So there's a little bit on the line here for Kansas. But this is about BYU and the fact that they are number 6. They are only favored by 3 points. This is a Kansas team that is not a very good football team. Do they continue the luck? Is this a game where they just go and do what they've been doing all year?
Yeah, I think that is the question. I mean, I would say Kansas is coming off their best game of the season. We finally saw Jalen Daniels do Jalen Daniels things. We've expected that from them. But you're right. They don't have that much to play for. Where we started the season by saying basically this whole league feels wide open. Anyone could win a Big 12. They're not going to win the Big 12. But you get to be spoilers. And like you said, the bowl streak, there are things to play for here. And we saw a complete game from them. This is what's really fascinating about BYU. I got real sour on them watching that Utah game because they didn't deserve to win it, right? They did not play well. If Utah had scored a couple of points.
I know.
8 points in the second half.
But that's where I'm did they deserve to win it, though? Because they shut out Utah in the second half. I struggle with this team so much.
And then,
it's kind of the point, though, right?
Utah did allow that big play to set up the game-winning field goal, too. It's hard.
It's so frustrating watching
how much credit do you give versus, they could be the luckiest team in the country because of the way that some of these games ended? Man, it's so hard. It's so hard to go. I love the BYU story. I think Kalani Sitake is one of the most underrated coaches in the country.
I agree with that.
I just don't know if that team played anyone in the top 5, including Indiana. I don't think they win the game.
No.
So it's hard. It's hard because, again, body of work. And then also the committee readjusting how they felt about them because they did ding them too much last week. How do we feel about the Big 12? It's not as, the top end is nowhere near like the other conferences. So what does it mean to be at the top of the league? I just got a lot of questions. So I think we'll learn about them down the stretch here. But I guess I'm not surprised that the line changed so much. I'm surprised it opened where it did. I am going to say that I think BYU wins and covers the 3 points, but I don't feel great about this team as one that I think like would win a game or multiple games when we get to the postseason.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think they will win. They need to cover. I think they will, but they need to just to kind of
make a
for
point.
Confidence sake and for narratives. I was talking to somebody who covers this sport, and they got one of those hypothetical lines from Vegas about a potential Big 12 championship matchup between BYU and Colorado. And as it stands today, Colorado would be a 4-point favorite in that game. So
right.
that is, and what's Colorado like 17? I can't remember. We don't have them pulled up right now, but like that's kind of where I feel like this team lives in the grand scheme of this sport right now, just from watching the way that they've kind of like eked out games, and in particular against some teams that have not been very good this year. So all that to say, they're going to win this football game. I'm pretty confident about that, but I'm just curious what the outcome actually looks like when we're talking about it next week.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's totally fair. And I think that we have made some picks on this pod that are basically like they have to win. Mm-hmm. And this feels like it. Feels like it's a must win. I know, which is weird to say. Like it's not like in the usual example.
Undefeated number 6 team in the country is a must win.
Yeah, but I agree. It's like you can't lose to Kansas. You're trying to get us all to take you very seriously. You're trying to stay in the race like as an at-large team. If you lose, you can't lose this game.
Yep. All right, let's get to this final one. This is one that we're going to have in prime time. We got number 1, Oregon. They're a 14-point favorite against my guy, Luke Fickell, and Wisconsin. Over-under is 52.5 in this game. Wisconsin has been like a little bit of a roller coaster this year, no doubt. Like they had their stretch of not playing very great, and then they had 3 games where they looked really good, and then it's kind of like come back down to earth for them a little bit. They're playing with Braden Locke, who is a backup quarterback, and I think that he does a great job for the circumstances, but he's also guaranteed to throw an interception every game. And then here we have Oregon, and we've talked about them this whole show as just consistent, just offensively go out, get the job done, defensively go out, get the job done. We talk about Dan Lanning and the way he likes to manage games. If you didn't watch last week, they had a fake punt. Jordan Birch, who is a 6'6", 290 defensive lineman, was out there running the ball like he was a running back. Like this is what Oregon does. And just to throw this in there, and I'm glad you put this note in here, Nicole, the semifinalists for the Joe Moore Award came out, and among all of the semifinalists, you have the Oregon Ducks. And we were talking about how they couldn't protect the beginning of the year, and all they did was a little bit of shuffling on that offensive line, and they have done a phenomenal job, not only protecting Dylan Gabriel, but their run game is one of my favorite to watch. It's not a super dominant run game, but it's a really effective run game.
Yeah, they deserve a ton of credit for figuring that out. They really did have issues in the first couple weeks of the season. And then obviously breaking in a transfer quarterback, but someone so experienced in Dylan Gabriel, it is now meshing. It is now working. And so that's really like, I'm just interested in getting a closer view of them and going to Camp Randall. Again, Wisconsin has been very inconsistent. They beat up on some bad teams in the Big Ten. We wondered if they had turned a corner. Still not quite there. Like these are the games Luke Fickell has not been able to win at Wisconsin. These are the games that they've really, really struggled. And this is why they went out and got him. They went and said, hey, we don't want to just win the Big Ten West or, beat the teams that are in the West because now there's no divisions. We want to contend for national championships. We want the ceiling to be higher. And then it's been rough. It's been rough. You're trying to, kind of overhaul the offensive identity of a program that's been there for decades, and just work through things. You've had quarterback injuries, a lot of injury luck actually over the last 2 seasons, bad luck. So there's just a lot that's still out there that Luke Fickell and the staff need to prove. I don't know if they're going to be able to do it against the number 1 team in the country. The only team that has actually been consistent over the course of this year. Use that stat, by the way. So it's the first time since 2014 that we're this far into the season and only one preseason top 25 team is undefeated. And it's Oregon. So that's where we are. Like, that's how they have played compared to everybody else in a chaotic season. They're favored by 14.5 points. I think they're going to cover it.
Yeah.
But I am still interested in seeing them on the road in an environment like this. I would like to see Wisconsin push them. I'd like for us to learn something about the Ducks. But at this point, man, I mean, it's smooth sailing, Big Ten championship game, CFP, like they're so well positioned for all of this. And Dan Lanning is such a great coach that I'm not concerned about it. It is just, 2 touchdown spread is a lot, but I think that this offense is good enough to do it. I think the defense has played well. And I do think, to your point about the run game, they'll just be able to ice the game away once they have it too late.
I agree with all of that. I do think they cover this number. They've been just so consistent, and Wisconsin is just not. It doesn't feel like they're in a spot right now to pull off an upset like that, and it's unfortunate for year 2 and Luke Fickell, and I certainly thought that the program was going to be further along than this. Now, I will say, for the sake of driving narratives, you have Nebraska, they're playing USC. If they lose, and then Wisconsin loses this game to Oregon, you've got 2 Big Ten year 2 coaches everybody was excited about seeing their programs take steps, and they will be playing for a bowl bid. Okay. And so that is going to be a huge one if the outcomes are that both those teams lose this week.
Which, by the way, so these are multiple levels of desperation for these coaches and these seasons, because USC and Nebraska playing each other is that. Right? Like we've seen, again, we talked about the offensive coordinator change on one side, quarterback change, Miller Moss got benched on the other side. There's a lot at stake there. And then to your point.
Yes. The drama, I feel like a lot of people just look at the drama of the teams that are in the playoff picture and the conference races, whatever. I want to look at the meat of the conference. I want to see who's fighting for a bowl game and making all the changes to try to get there. That's the drama I like.
I mean, especially I know we'll talk about this next week and next week's pod too, but about USC. You're in a world now where the buyout for Lincoln Riley is over $90 million, I'm told. And then you have a scenario where now UCLA is playing well. They've gotten better over the course of the season, which definitely doesn't help because you have been nosediving and people have been just really frustrated where you are in the Lincoln Riley tenure, plus everything else. And Indiana being undefeated at this point in the year with a year 1 coach does not help any of these programs. Everyone's why didn't we have a Kurt Signe? Why can't we do what Indiana's doing? They've lost more games than anybody else in the history of college football, and they're winning. They're number 5 in the country. So all of that as a backdrop, it really is fascinating. So we will definitely talk more
Can
about
I just
USC
get one more little thing here since we're just going
all over the place? Yes.
UCLA can absolutely make a bowl game. They've got Washington, USC, and Fresno State, and I think they just have to win 2. So I didn't have that at the beginning of the year. After they got cooked at home by Indiana, I'm like, they're dead in the water.
You know what? That might be also one of those overreactions. We're like, oh, how nice for Indiana. That's so, oh, maybe.
And also, Deshaun Foster can't coach. It's just the whole overreaction. It turns
out, maybe Indiana's just really, really good, and UCLA could still turn things around. All right, before we go, we got to do our underdog picks for the week. By the way, mine was dicey because I had Mizzou, which that was one of the craziest finishes we've seen with back-to-back scoop and scores, chaos to beat Oklahoma. But I will take the win there for my upset pick. This week, I'm going with Rutgers plus 5.5 points at Maryland. Now, Joshua, you love the meat and potatoes of a conference.
I do.
Rutgers and Maryland. These are teams constantly compared to each other, constantly jockeying for position. Rutgers has had a bunch of injuries. Really impressed by what they did to Minnesota and how they won that game last week without Kyle Monongai. It was kind of the 8th and Kaliak-Manis revenge tour, right? There was a lot of overlap between those teams. So signs of life and just well prepared, well coached, well executed game. And Maryland, they had the win against USC. That was great. That's the high point of their season. This is a program that just really does not play well in November. Like this is just something that has always been there. It's been a trend line of the Mike Locksley era. So 5.5 points feels like a lot because these are teams that have not been great over the course of the season, but I feel better about Rutgers and I am going to take them plus 5.5. I think they could even win outright as well.
So this is an interesting one for me because I agree with your logic, but the history in this game, I think Maryland is 7-3 versus Rutgers since coming into the conference. And I struggle. So I'm there with you because my brain is telling me to take Rutgers in this one for all the reasons that you mentioned. And the fact that Maryland, like really in October as well as November, like
October too.
They kind of forget how to play football.
Used to be a November thing, and now sometimes
it stretches into October, which is a shame. So I actually do like this one. This is a game that I'll have my eye on because, again, the meat and potatoes. My underdog covered last week as well. If you remember, a week ago, Nicole was gaslighting me on this show because she thought that I had it flipped of who I wanted to pick, and I wanted to pick against BYU. And it seems like it's a popular thing to do now, is to pick against BYU. But yeah, that was a wild game. We already talked about that one. This week, I'm going to go with some more Big 12 action here. I've got Arizona State. They are a 9-point dog. They're at Kansas State. Arizona State has been a really welcome surprise, I think, for folks who are like true viewers of college football. Now, the running back Scadaboo is banged up and his status is in question here. This is a little bit risky because Arizona State's 2 losses have been on the road, but I have this feeling about Kansas State that they are just like everybody else. They're super flawed. Avery Johnson has moments that I think are really good. He has some moments also where it's like he doesn't give you enough throwing the football. He can be turnover prone at times. And so I think I like this matchup. I want Arizona State to win outright, but I certainly do think that they can cover the 9.
Okay, so I understand why you're doing this and why you're picking this, but I can't go there because the week that I picked Arizona State as my upset pick, they went on the road and lost to Cincinnati.
Yes, they did.
So
yes,
I just cannot go there again, but I really do believe in what Kenny Dillingham is building. I think it's an awesome story. Would love to see Arizona State like reemerge as a factor in now the Big 12. So I would love, like in emotionally, I support your pick. But like logically, they burned me before, so I can't.
Last thing I'll say, I was actually going to fade BYU again until the line changed.
Of course.
So I had to pick a different team.
Of course you were. Listen, I'm much more skeptical of BYU this week, so I would not gaslight you if you picked against them this week. I do apologize because you were correct.
You've apologized like 5 times, and I just need to stop saying it. But you're very kind. I know you didn't mean to gaslight me.
No, I didn't. And you were correct that Utah should have won that game and certainly covered the 4 points in that one. All right, that'll do it for Rushing the Field this week. Somehow we are already in week 12. Still
Crazy.
So many more meaningful games to go. And we will have reaction every set of college football playoff rankings, as well as our normal content throughout the week, getting you set for the games that matter and the news and notes across the sport. For Joshua Perry, I'm Nicole Auerbach, and we'll see you next week.